Hello everyone, welcome to Analog IAS Current Affair Analysis for 14th August 2020, and these are the articles that we'll be dealing today. The first article for the day is taken from the Hindu and it is titled Historic Ratification. So this is about the ILO standards that were universally adopted. Now before getting into the specifics of this organization and the news item, let us try to understand in brief about what ILO was all about. So ILO was the only tripartite UN agency. Now, what do you mean by tripartite? So there are three segments of people or stakeholders involved when we are talking about the rights of workers. So that is the government, the workers themselves, and employers. So this organization has become a sort of umbrella organization and created the platform for all kinds of negotiations with respect to the issues faced by each of the stakeholder. So this is one of the oldest organizations, and this was created way before UN also came into existence, because this is a body that was created in 1919 upon the Treaty of Versailles. So at that time it was affiliated to League of Nations, which later evolved into what is today known as the United Nations. So ILO's founding principle was based on the philosophy that social justice is essential for universal and lasting peace. This understanding became very important in the context of the many bloody revolutions of that era, say for the Chinese Revolution or the Russian Revolution, or how the French Revolution and American independence have shaped up the thinking of the modern world, has culminated itself into the philosophy of ILO. So this organization received Nobel Peace Prize in 1969 for improving peace among classes, pursuing decent work and justice for workers, providing technical assistance to other developing nations. So this is the background in which ILO was placed. So ILO came up with a lot of conventions and brought all the countries together on a common platform to address issues that were common for workplace. So in the present context, let us try to understand the magnanimity of the child labor issue. So 152 million children are trapped in child labor. 72 million amongst them are engaged in very dangerous activities. So the current efforts would have to be increased significantly to achieve the universal objective of removing child labor from the world. The present COVID-19 pandemic has made things only worse, because children from rural backgrounds and socio-economically weak backgrounds are slipping back into child labor. They're dropping out of schools because of the economic stress that this pandemic has put on the communities, and the gains that we have attained over a long period of time are witnessing a reversal trend. So this is the present challenge. In these times of distress, there is one positive news that came out. Basically, ILO has 8 fundamental conventions or broad objectives. So India has signed up or ratified for 6 out of these 8 conventions. What are those? The first one is Forced Labor Convention. The second one is Abolition of Forced Labor Convention. Third one is Worst Forms of Child Labor Convention, Minimum Age Convention, Discrimination Convention, and the last one is Equal Remuneration Convention. So all these are a part of the directive principles of state policy as well. So the most important one amongst all these is the worst forms of child labor. Now the article is about this particular worst forms of child labor. Now before proceeding into the article, another important prelims pointer that I want you to tell is India has not ratified 2 fundamental conventions. What are they? So there are 2 conventions that India did not sign. One is Freedom of Association and Protection of the Right to Organize Convention 1948. This is also called Convention number 87. and the second one is Right to Organize and Collective Bargaining, Convention number 98. So the main reason for non-ratification of these conventions is due to certain restrictions imposed on the government servants. So for example, IAS officers cannot organize themselves and collectively bargain to increase salaries. They cannot strike against the government. So all this sort of restrictions are there. That is why India did not uh, ratify these particular conventions. Apart from this, India signed every other convention which has a bearing on the worker rights. Now, the present news is in 101 years of its history of ILO, for the very first time, there was a labor standard which was universally ratified. That means everyone has accepted it. That is the convention number 182. So, the latest country that decided to outlaw the worst forms of child labor given under Convention 182 is the Kingdom of Tonga. So, this has, along with the ILO's efforts in its 1973 Minimum Age Convention, prevented the employment of children below a lower age threshold. So, under the influence of both these ILO standards, millions of young boys and girls have been rescued from dangerous works. So, in the year 2021, ILO decided to name that year as the year to abolish child labor. Now, with the universal ratification of this convention, we have to move towards a framework that comprehensively deals with the elimination of this child labor and slowly move towards the sustainable development goals of 2030. So, elimination of child labor is also having an effect on the other sustainable development goals as well. So, this is a good start. Even India took a long time in ratifying this convention. It only ratified this in 2017. So, since almost all the countries are on board right now, we have to move towards creating a comprehensive framework and achieving the potential of children across the globe. That should be our objective. That is the gist of this article. The first article for the day is taken from the Indian Express and it is titled Myth of the Pristine Forest. So, this is in the context of the Forest Rights Act and the provision of critical wildlife habitats. So, let us try to understand the Forest Rights Act of 2006. What is the provision for critical wildlife habitat? Even from the prelims point of view, this question has been very important given the controversies surrounding around it. So, let us try to understand this Forest Rights Act and the importance of having critical wildlife habitats and the approaches for conservation. Before we get into the details of this article, let us try to understand what FRA 2006 says. FRA stands for Forest Rights Act. So, millions of people live in and around forest lands in our country, but they don't have any legal right to their homes, lands, or livelihood before this act was passed. So, in order to recognize their rights, this act was passed. A few government officials before this act had all the powers over forests and forest dwellers. So, what was the result? Both forests and people did not have the best of the rights that they deserve. So, the act recognizes forest dwellers' rights and makes conservation more accountable. So, this has been the agenda. So, this law recognizes certain rights. What are they? If we have to categorize the various rights that are recognized under this law, there are three broad categories. The first one is land rights. So, when they talk about land rights, so any person who has been cultivating on a piece of land in the forest area before 13th December 2005, those people can claim that piece of land because it is important for their survival and livelihood. So, those who started cultivating on that piece of land after this cutoff date, they are not entitled to this land rights. Another caveat that we have to understand in this law is the maximum amount of land that a tribal can hold is 4 hectares. So, there is no provision which says that every person will get 4 hectares. So if there is a person who is cultivating more than 4 hectares, the maximum limit that he can have is only 4 hectares. Say he is cultivating only on half an acre or half an hectare, he is entitled to own or use only that half hectare of land. So that is the provision. So the other set of rights that we have to talk about is the usage rights. The law provides for rights to use or collecting certain minor forest produce. These include things like tendu patta or tobacco leaves or BD leaves, herbs, medicinal plants, everything that has been traditionally collected in forest areas. However, we have to note that minor forest produce does not include timber. Timber has been the major reason why British had owned these forests and driven out the forest dwellers. So timber has always traditionally been a vast resource of the government of India even before independence. That is why timber is under the ambit of the government but not the forest dwellers. The second kind of produce or the second kind of use rights they have within the forest are ability to use grazing grounds. So if these people have say cattle, they can use the lands in the forest for grazing activities for their animals. They can also use the water bodies to support themselves and also their pastoral communities. This brings us to the third kind of traditional area of use by nomadic or pastoral communities. So the pastoral communities which depend on animal husbandry can move within their forest area with their herds as opposed to practicing settled agriculture. That is to say, if before this cutoff date they were carrying out pastoral activities on a land but not agricultural activities, they cannot start agricultural activities. The agricultural activities are allowed to only those set of people who were cultivating already before this cutoff date. So apart from this, there is a third set of important right, that is the right to protect. This third category of rights include the right to protect and conserve. So generally, the people dwelling in the forest areas do have the knowledge of conservation because they always lived in tandem with the laws of nature and they themselves carried out conservation activities. But after the independence era, the attitude of forest department officials is in such a way that they believe that only forest department is equipped to understand the laws of conservation and only they can carry out any conservation activities. So what is the implication of this attitude of the forest department officials? So if for example you plant a tree in a forest area, that can be a criminal offense because the justification given by forest department is the fact that if anyone other than the forest department officials plant some random trees that can cause an ecological disturbance, say for example if they plant an invasive alien species that can destroy the entire ecosystem, but it is not justified to undermine the traditional knowledge of the forest dwellers. So recognizing this importance and the need to preserve the traditional knowledge, sometimes more than the scientist, the traditional knowledge that has been passed on by the community elders, that itself is very valuable for conservation activities. Recognizing this, the government has amended the law and also included the right to protect and conserve and allowed the forest dwellers to carry out conservation activities as well. So this was the background of the Forest Rights Act. Now within the same Forest Rights Act, there is a critical concept called critical wildlife habitat. Now what is a critical wildlife habitat? To simplify things, we can say that it is an area which cannot be touched by any sort of human activity, including those of forest dwellers. So if the expert committee decides that a particular piece of land within the forest area is not fit for man animal coexistence, then that area is decided as a critical wildlife habitat. So in this context, there are two schools of thought. One that believes that man and animal coexistence will not be possible at all, and the other one is something that believes that coexistence is very much possible. Now, the present context of the article stems from the second school of thought. So, they have very compelling arguments as well. So, this article presents the case study of Maharashtra. So, let us try to understand that. A NGO which belongs to the first school of thought of conservation, that coexistence of humans and animals is completely not possible, filed a petition in the Mumbai High Court in 2014. It is called the Vanashakti. So it demanded implementation of the CWH provisions which are there within FRA. After this, the State Forest Department, which believes in the first school of thought, also took this opportunity to notify the CWH provisions, and there were nearly 55 protected areas. Within the 55 protected areas, people were evicted, or at least notifications were given for 54 protected areas. Now, the author of this article says that due process has not been followed. According to the CWH provisions laid down in the Forest Rights Act, there is a particular method by which we have to decide whether that area is not fit for human inhabitation. Now, what is that process? So, the law says that firstly, there should be a multi-stakeholder consultative committee which comes up with a scientific advice. So, these scientific parameters should be also taking into consideration various social scientists, wildlife experts, and other government agencies that are responsible for forest conservation. So, in the present context, when Maharashtra took this sort of a decision, there was no such committee. It was unilaterally imposed that the people from these protected areas should be relocated to some other place. So, the main contention is this critical wildlife habitat provisions can be applied only when the other provisions of Forest Rights Act are also applied to all the areas. For example, in this article, the writer quotes the example of Melghat Wildlife Sanctuary. So, in this sanctuary, the Forest Right Acts were not implemented because there were pending claims. Say, for example, there were a lot of people who were involved in cultivation or pastoral activities. They did not get their land. Their livelihood still depended upon the mercy of the Forest Department officials. In this context, a law is as effective as the implementation. Now, in such a context, if they are asked to relocate, they have been living there for generations. Now, did we actually understand that coexistence is not at all possible through a expert committee? No, that didn't happen. So, if you have to take a look at some positive examples, there are definitely examples in Karnataka where such coexistence has been happening for many years now. So, if you want to take a look at it, try to understand how the Soliga community in Karnataka coexists with an area which has the largest number of tiger reserves. For example, we are talking about the BRT Tiger Reserve, which has one of the highest density of tigers in the country. Despite that fact, the Soliga community has been peacefully coexisting with the tigers. Why not take the approach that was followed in Karnataka, try to understand the best practices and implement that in the Melghat Wildlife Sanctuary and other protected areas of Maharashtra? So the problem is the concept of conservation is looked at from the lens of pure conservationists who believe that wildlife existence should not be intervening with people. Now, it is practically impossible to delineate the boundaries of people living in forests with that of wildlife. The only way possible to address this problem is to ensure that there are proper mechanisms, laws, and understanding which is based on pure science to allow for this coexistence. Regulation should not be haphazard. Rule of law backed by proper scientific evidence is the need of the hour. So that is the context of this article. This concept of critical wildlife habitat is very important for your prelims exam as well.